Hi everyone, welcome to a fairly brief video, 15 minutes or less, on data collection. So I wanted this to be an introduction to the data collection process, and this will help to frame the activities that we're going to be doing in class on Monday, and will hopefully help you get started on how thinking of ways in which you're going to collect data in order to help answer your research question. So I will say, first of all, though, that it is really important that you read Chapter 6 in your textbook, because this has a lot more detailed information about the data collection process and the different methods of doing data collection than I am able to provide in this video or in class. So I would say Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 are the most important chapters to read in the next few weeks. We don't go into it in class or through exams or your requirements in your project as detailed as Chapter 6 and 7 are, but it is really good foundational information, so it will be great to supplement that with what I give you in lectures. So when we are collecting data, though, this is a really significant part of the whole research process and probably what might be considered the meat or the heart of the study. Collecting data is vital to being able to legitimately and properly answer your research questions. So all the way along, think when you're constructing how you're going to design your survey, when you're perhaps thinking of questions that you're going to have on that survey, you're always asking yourself, does this data enable the research question to be answered? Does it relate back to the research question? Because that is really a significant question. If it doesn't help to advance knowledge and help to answer what your research question is, what you're hoping to find out, then why would you collect the data on it? So as an example of that, why collect data on gender of the participants in your study if you're not going to do an analysis or it's not going to be a significant factor in helping to answer your research question? So you're only going to collect data on information that is important to answer your broad question. The real basics of data collection is we always work with populations and samples, and this applies for qualitative and quantitative research. So meaning it applies regardless of the method of data collection. We always think in terms of who is the population that we are talking about in our research question, and what is the sample that we're going to use in order to help represent that population. So page 138 in your textbook gives really good definitions for what is a sample and what is a population. So I will go over a little bit of that here in a bit more detail too. The reason that we collect a sample rather than try to survey an entire population is because it's just simply not practical in most cases to find and to talk to or to have everybody that our question might apply to answer our question or participate in our data collection. So it's not usually, especially in this class, it's not practical or realistic or even possible to interview every single person who has thought about starting a small business, or every single person who has frequented a locally owned business, or every single person who works at minimum wage. It is just impossible to do that. So we think first of all about what the population is that our question applies to, and then we work from a sample size. And that sample are the people. Generally they're human participants, and in your case they're always human participants, but they're the people who can represent the population in terms of helping to answer our research question. So with research, we always do work with a sample. So in a little bit more detail, a population is always the broader group of people to whom your study might apply. So it's not the whole world all the time. It doesn't apply to the whole world, but it's the broader group of people that your study might apply to. So in the case of if you're looking at orientation programs for employees of restaurants, your population might be all employees of restaurants, because your question is such that it could apply to any employee of any restaurant. More than likely, though, you want to narrow it down to something like employee of restaurants, say, in Edmonton, so that the questions you ask would apply just to restaurants, to employees who work in restaurants in Edmonton, because we probably can't draw inferences to restaurants across the world, for instance. Maybe it might even be more specific than that. Maybe you're looking at brand new employees. So your population are employees of restaurants who have worked for under 1 year in Edmonton. Or perhaps your research question is about people who are full-time students and are also employees of restaurants. So your population is employees of restaurants who are also full-time students. So my point here is that your population depends on your research question and how specific that research question is. So with your research question, you have to think about what that population might be. And really, the more precise that you make your population, probably the easier it is to construct the research questions, and the more importantly, I guess, the more legitimate that your results are going to be in applying to that population. In my dissertation work, my population were library support staff who are in Alberta who had been working for more than 2 years. So that was my population. It wasn't everybody in the world who works in libraries. It wasn't even everybody in Canada who works in libraries. In fact, it was a very specific population of what are called library paraprofessionals who work in Alberta and who have been employed for more than 2 years. So that was my population. That is still too large to go and to interview all of those people because there's hundreds of them. So my sample size was 26 of them. So 26 people answered my interview questions, and those 26 people really are representative of the entire population across Alberta. So a sample then is always a subset of your population, and it really is just the actual people who participated in your study. So let's see, if we could use as an example, I wrote it down here somewhere, your own studies. Of course, I can't find it when I need it. Where did I put it? Let me find it here. Pause it. Okay, so I'm actually going to leave that for you to figure out what your population in your sample is, but I will give you an example from previous classes. So one student group did a study on coping mechanisms of stress, coping mechanisms for stress for students. So their population was MacEwan University students. That was their population. Not every single student in the world. We're focusing just really on what the MacEwan experience is. And their sample were the people who participated in their study. So it was a random sampling where individuals, whoever wished to fill out the survey, filled out the survey. And so those were the individuals that were the sample that represented the population as a whole. So in your particular case then, if we summarize this, the sample is the group of individuals who participate in your study, and your population is the broader group of people to whom your results will apply. And this link right here gives you another example and some more information if you're still unclear as to what the difference is between population and sample. So what I want you to think about is who your population is for your study, and then write down who you think your sample is for your particular study. And in the case of this assignment, in the case of this class, our sample, how we choose our samples is perhaps not as flexible as it might be in a different research study, just because of the elements of time, because of the elements of availability of people, and just our ability to access that population. So you want to think about who your population and who your sample is in that case. There's a little quiz on this PowerPoint as well that will help you, and we're going to do a little short quiz in class, just for exercise, not for grades, next Monday. All right, let me catch up with my notes here. And of course, my computer is telling me I need to do updates. I do not want to do updates. So there's different sampling techniques. So how do we choose who is going to complete our study then? Who are the people that are going to be representing our population? There's probability and non-probability sampling techniques, and this is covered in your textbook starting on page 142. So probability sampling is only when you have a complete list of the entire population. This is not going to be the case for any of your studies. We do not know the entire population of people who wish to start a small business. We do not have an entire list of the population of people who frequent locally owned businesses. And we do not know every single name of every person who works at minimum wage. But if we were doing a study, say on a particular organization, and we had a list of all of the employees in that organization, then we could do our sampling because we do have that entire list, and we do it as probability sampling. And then there are different methods of selecting randomly from that list so that individuals do represent the population. One method that your textbook talks about is simple random sampling. That's on page 142. And simple random sampling is like the lottery, where you just essentially draw names out of a hat. So if there's 200 employees, you might draw 100 names randomly out of a hat, and those 100 people will represent the population of 200 people. So it is a 50% probability that each name would be drawn. In this class, let's say that we were doing, the population was this particular MGMT 240 class, then a probability, we would have the whole list of the population, and maybe random sampling would be, I would just draw 5 names out of a hat, and 5 of you would answer questions that would represent the population of the entire class. Non-probability is when you don't have a list of the entire population. So in my research, for example, I don't have a list of every library employee in Alberta, so I don't know the whole list. So I'm just trying to select a sample as best I can that best answers the research question and best represents the population. So there's different ways of doing that sampling, or the sampling technique, and these are the 4 primary ways. One is through quota sampling, meaning that if I want to, say, have a certain number of participants who are male and a certain number of participants who are female, or maybe a certain number who work 2 to 5 years at a business, and then a certain number of people that work over 5 years, so that I have a representation from different segments of the population. That's called quota sampling. Purposive sampling is when I purposefully select who I want to answer the question. So I might do that if I know that there's certain people or individuals whose experiences will best represent that entire population. There's volunteer sampling, where it's really random, where you're just dependent on if people are going to volunteer to complete your survey. And so in all of your cases in your groups, I believe we are working with volunteer sampling, where we're just going to take whoever we can get that answers your survey. In a way, it's also convenience sampling though too, because we're really just drawing on the most convenient people that we can find to participate. So, sort of like gathering the lowest hanging fruit. We're just looking for people who respond to the survey in a timely manner, and we'll just take those responses, and that will be our sample. And the textbook goes into more detail about those 4 methods of sampling as well. And we're going to move on next class to talk about questionnaires and development of questionnaires and questions on a survey, and do an exercise around that. So if you can, read these sections of your textbook, look at the information I posted on this PowerPoint, and also look for more information online so that you're really clear in your mind of what population and sampling is and what sampling techniques are. So thanks very much, and we'll see you in class next week. Bye.